The subtle yet profound inversion of roles that occurs in families as children mature is a natural progression, yet it often ushers in a period of significant emotional adjustment for parents. For years, the parental mantle signifies unwavering guidance, tireless protection, and a constant stream of sacrifices made with the earnest hope of fostering flourishing lives for one's offspring. However, a disquieting shift can manifest when those nurtured individuals, now adults navigating their own paths, begin to exhibit a startling detachment from parental counsel. The familiar ease of communication may give way to an unsettling pattern where opinions are summarily dismissed, advice is met with a condescending inflection, or worse, the parent is made to feel like a burdensome impediment, an inconvenient afterthought in the grand narrative of their children's lives. This experience of witnessing the diminishment of respect from those you have meticulously raised is profoundly painful. It can ignite a firestorm of frustration, a simmering anger that whispers a primal urge to remind them of every sleepless night, every deferred personal dream, every ounce of immeasurable effort poured into their development and well-being. Yet, in the crucible of such emotional turmoil, a crucial truth often emerges. Anger, while a natural response, is a blunt and ineffective instrument for mending the fraying fabric of respect. More often than not, it serves only to widen the chasm, deepening the resentment and exacerbating the rift. A more potent, more graceful, and ultimately far more effective path exists, one that bypasses the destructive cycles of arguments and recriminations entirely. This is not about capitulation or a passive acceptance of diminished regard, but rather a strategic and empowered reclaiming of your rightful position as a valued and respected figure within the familial dynamic. This journey begins with simple yet transformative adjustments in your own approach and interaction. Today, we embark on an exploration of 6 pivotal strategies, subtle yet powerful recalibrations in how you respond to evolving family dynamics that possess the capacity to fundamentally alter your children's perception of you. Some of these approaches may even surprise you with their effectiveness, but each holds the key to unlocking the mutual admiration and deep-seated respect you so rightly deserve. One of the most pervasive and inwardly debilitating missteps that parents often find themselves ensnared in as their children transition into adulthood is the relentless, almost compulsive pursuit of their approval. This pattern can be insidiously ingrained, manifesting as a tendency to go to extraordinary lengths to accommodate every perceived whim or desire, a constant inclination to say yes when one's own inner voice is whispering a firm no, and a habitual prioritization of their needs and desires above one's own, all fueled by the unspoken, often unconscious hope that this heightened level of self-sacrifice will finally elicit the deep and abiding appreciation that feels so elusive. Yet, a deeply ironic and painful paradox invariably emerges from this dynamic. The more earnestly and desperately you chase their approval, the less genuine and lasting respect you tend to cultivate. True, unfeigned respect is not a byproduct of self-effacement or the suppression of one's own identity. Rather, it is an intrinsic outgrowth of self-respect, a testament to one's own inherent worth. When you consistently bend backward, concede readily to their wishes, and prioritize maintaining an outward semblance of peace and harmony above all else, you inadvertently and often unintentionally transmit a potent message to your children. This message communicates with alarming clarity that your feelings, your personal needs, and the very sound of your voice are secondary, subservient to their desires. Once this lesson is internalized, it becomes regrettably easy for them to relegate you to a position of being taken for granted, their appreciation dwindling as your self-neglect becomes normalized. Consider the poignant narrative of Margaret, a woman who, in her formative years and early adulthood, possessed a formidable spirit and an unwavering sense of independence, a woman who charted her own course with conviction. As the years advanced and she entered the later stages of her life, a gradual shift occurred. She began to defer almost all significant decisions to her children, meticulously rearranging her personal schedule to align with their often demanding schedules, stifling her own opinions and insights, and quietly enduring the increasingly disrespectful tones that punctuated their interactions. "I just want to keep the family together," she would confide, a sentiment that, while deeply understandable and born of love, ultimately proved counterproductive. Her children, no longer perceiving the strong, independent force that had once guided them, began to view her as someone who would invariably yield, someone who would always agree, someone who would perpetually remain silent, her own voice muted. She genuinely believed she was preserving familial harmony, but in the stark reality of the situation, she was effectively silencing herself, her own value diminishing in the process. If you find yourself observing a noticeable wavering in your children's respect, the absolutely crucial first step is not to issue demands for it, but rather to cease projecting an aura of desperate need for it. This involves the conscious establishment of clear, non-negotiable boundaries, the cultivation of the ability to articulate a firm no when such a response is necessary, and the courageous vocalization of your thoughts and opinions, even when you anticipate disagreement. The very moment you begin to authentically honor and deeply respect yourself, they will, with an almost inevitable certainty, begin to perceive you through an entirely new lens, and over the passage of time, that precious commodity of lost respect will naturally find its way back to you, not as a concession, but as a genuine recognition of your restored self-worth. When the individuals you have lovingly guided through life begin to exhibit a disregard for your well-considered advice, consistently interrupt your attempts to articulate your thoughts, or, in more egregious instances, treat you with outright disrespect, the immediate, visceral, and almost instinctual response is often an overwhelming urge to engage in argument, to meticulously recount every sacrifice you have ever made, and to adamantly insist that they cease their behavior and listen to your words. However, a profound and liberating truth can spare you years of unnecessary frustration and emotional drain. Arguing, in the context of earning genuine respect, is an ultimately futile and unproductive endeavor. Pause for a moment and reflect honestly. In your own life experiences, when has a heated debate or a passionate argument ever truly convinced someone, in their deepest core, to respect you more? Respect is not a prize that is won through the art of verbal jousting or the skillful deployment of logical fallacies. It is a quality that is organically cultivated through your very presence, the dignified manner in which you carry yourself, and the unshakable grace with which you respond when your patience is relentlessly tested. When you choose to counter disrespect with an outpouring of anger, you inadvertently, though powerfully, confirm their existing perception that they hold a position of significant power over you, that they can, through their actions, elicit a predictable and perhaps even satisfying emotional reaction. Consider the example of Frank, a retired educator who had spent his entire professional career commanding classrooms with a quiet, unyielding authority, his presence alone dictating a culture of respect. Yet, within the confines of his own home, his adult children had systematically relegated him to the sidelines, dismissing his well-intentioned counsel, consistently ignoring his legitimate concerns, and even scoffing openly when he offered gentle corrective feedback. Initially, Frank retaliated, attempting to reassert his diminished worth through protracted arguments and pointed discussions. But the more vehemently he fought for recognition, the more his children seemed to emotionally withdraw, creating an even greater distance between them. Then, a subtle yet profoundly significant shift began to occur in his approach. Instead of engaging in the exhausting cycle of arguments, Frank began to cultivate a practice of truly listening to them, not to validate their perspectives, but to understand them. He consciously stopped seeking external validation through his words and instead projected an intrinsic aura of unwavering self-respect. He communicated with a calm, measured wisdom, a demeanor notably devoid of the desperate need to win every point or prove his superiority. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, his children began to notice the change. They observed a man who was no longer desperate for their approval, a man who did not feel the need to continually prove his worth, but who simply exuded an unshakable inner strength and a quiet confidence that did not require external affirmation. If your children are exhibiting a discernible lack of respect, it is imperative to resist the primal urge to battle them for it. Instead, actively embody what respect truly looks like in action. Maintain your inherent dignity at all times. Speak with clear conviction and unwavering purpose, and under no circumstances whatsoever should you ever lower yourself to their level of disrespect. By resolutely standing your ground with an unyielding grace, they will absorb this powerful silent lesson, and in time, they will naturally and inevitably follow your lead, recognizing the strength and wisdom inherent in your dignified demeanor. One of the most challenging, yet undeniably vital lessons that we are compelled to learn as we navigate the later chapters of our lives is the profound realization that our own emotional fulfillment and sense of self-worth cannot and should not be solely or primarily contingent upon our children. While the love for them may be an infinite and boundless wellspring, and the innate human desire for their reciprocal love and deep respect is entirely natural and valid, the precise moment they sense your unwavering reliance on them for validation, affirmation, or even a fundamental sense of personal worth, the delicate power dynamic within the relationship inevitably shifts, and often not in your favor. The stark and often uncomfortable reality is that individuals, even our own beloved children, tend to offer genuine respect to those who are perceived as emotionally self-sufficient and independent. When you demonstrably depend on them for affirmation, for affection, or for consistent attention, you inadvertently place a significant burden upon them, a weight they may not be equipped or willing to carry. Rather than fostering a sense of gratitude or a desire to reciprocate your affections, this pervasive reliance can, paradoxically, breed feelings of obligation, leading them to withdraw emotionally, to treat you with impatience, or to exhibit irritability when your needs intersect with their own. The more intensely and overtly you seek their affection and validation, the less freely and authentically it is often given, as it begins to feel performative rather than genuine. Consider the experience of Helen, a woman whose inherent kindness and boundless generosity extended to her children in every conceivable way. As they matured and their own lives became increasingly complex and occupied, Helen found herself anxiously awaiting their calls, frequently initiating contact herself, expressing with a palpable longing how much she missed them and wishing for more frequent visits and deeper connection. Tragically, this earnest longing, rather than drawing them closer or fostering a greater sense of connection, began to subtly push them away. Her frequent calls started to feel less like a welcome connection and more like an imposition on their busy lives. Then, Helen made a conscious, deliberate choice to fundamentally alter her approach to relating with her children. She stopped waiting by the phone with bated breath. She initiated fewer calls, allowing them the space to reach out. Instead, she redirected her considerable energy inward, rediscovering old passions and forgotten hobbies, actively reconnecting with her own friends, and meticulously cultivating her own happiness and sense of purpose. The results of this internal recalibration were astonishingly impactful. Her children began to call her more frequently, exhibiting a newfound respect for her time and recognizing her as someone who possessed a rich and fulfilling life that was entirely independent of their constant presence. The lesson to be gleaned here is remarkably simple yet profoundly effective. The less you rely on your children for your sense of personal value and self-worth, the more they will invariably begin to cherish your presence and seek your company. When you demonstrably prove that you can stand tall and flourish on your own merits, they will naturally begin to respect you, not out of a sense of familial duty or obligation, but because they genuinely admire the vibrant, purposeful life you have meticulously built and continue to nurture for yourself. A primary catalyst that often precipitates a decline in children's respect for their parents is the parents' own passive allowance of such disrespectful behavior. If you consistently permit your children to speak to you disrespectfully, to disregard your carefully considered opinions, or to treat your valuable time and your emotions as if they possess no inherent value, they will, by the simple and predictable laws of human interaction, continue this pattern indefinitely. This is not necessarily a reflection of their inherent character or a deliberate malice on their part, but rather a fundamental human tendency, particularly within familial relationships. People will invariably treat you according to the parameters and boundaries that you yourself establish and consistently uphold. Setting clear boundaries is not synonymous with severing familial ties or intentionally creating unnecessary conflict. Rather, it is about calmly, consistently, and firmly articulating what specific behaviors you are willing to accept, and equally importantly, what behaviors you are absolutely unwilling to tolerate. Crucially, the effectiveness of boundary setting hinges entirely on the consistent enforcement of those boundaries whenever they are transgressed without exception. Recall the experience of Robert, a retired executive who had spent his professional life accustomed to the disciplined leadership and clear expectations that were the norm in his corporate environment. However, when it came to asserting himself with his adult children, he found himself inexplicably struggling to establish and maintain firm boundaries. They frequently interrupted his conversations, dismissed his legitimate concerns without consideration, and even offered unsolicited, often critical commentary on his personal lifestyle choices. Initially, Robert found himself tolerating this behavior, attempting to rationalize it by convincing himself that engaging in conflict was simply not worth the emotional effort. Yet, with each instance of his silence and his passive acceptance, he gradually came to realize that he was implicitly endorsing their actions, signaling his acquiescence. This realization prompted a pivotal and necessary change in his approach. When his son habitually interrupted him, Robert would calmly and firmly state, "I will continue speaking when you are ready to listen attentively." When his daughter readily dismissed his opinion, he would respond with, "You do not have to agree with my perspective, but I absolutely expect you to respect that I have one." And when they continued to persistently push his limits and disregard his expressed boundaries, he made it unequivocally clear, if they were incapable of extending basic respect, his constant presence in their lives would no longer be a given. The outcome of this firm yet respectful stance was transformative. They began to listen. While there was an initial period of resistance and perhaps even bewilderment at his newfound assertiveness, they soon recognized their father's unwavering resolve and the sincerity of his intentions. They saw that he valued himself enough to demand respect, and consequently, their own behavior began to shift, and they started to offer it more readily. If you observe your children exhibiting a noticeable lack of respect, it is imperative to introspect and question whether you are inadvertently enabling this behavior through your own lack of firm boundaries. For if you do not establish clear boundaries for yourself, they will not learn to set them for you. And if you do not consistently stand up for yourself and your own value, no one else will step in to do it for you. A swift, sure, and unfortunately common route to the diminishment of respect within family dynamics is the persistent and often unacknowledged pattern of offering kindness, time, and unwavering support to those individuals who consistently fail to acknowledge, appreciate, or reciprocate these gestures. As parents, this is a deeply ingrained pattern that many of us fall into, willingly giving our all without receiving recognition, accepting entitlement as a natural consequence, and overlooking the conspicuous absence of gratitude. The sobering and often painful truth is that when your boundless generosity is met with indifference, taken for granted, or met with a sense of entitlement, it does not foster love, nor does it cultivate genuine respect. Rather, it inadvertently cultivates expectation, a sense that your offerings are not gifts, but guaranteed rights. The very moment you cease this pattern of overextension, instead of expressing thanks or recognizing your efforts, they often feel inconvenienced or even resentful that the flow of giving has been curtailed. Consider the experience of George, a father who was renowned throughout his community for his unwavering and often selfless generosity toward his children. He readily offered substantial financial assistance whenever they encountered difficulties, dropped everything at a moment's notice to help with their myriad needs, and even reshaped significant aspects of his own life to accommodate their frequent requests and shifting priorities. Yet, instead of receiving heartfelt gratitude, he was consistently met with complaints, a noticeable lack of thank yous, and an ever-increasing expectation of even more. The most deeply painful aspect of this dynamic was when he, in turn, found himself needing their help or support. They were consistently unavailable, their own schedules conveniently too full. Then, George began a conscious process of recalibration. He stopped preemptively offering help, a significant shift in his ingrained behavior, and perhaps more importantly, he learned to articulate a firm and necessary no when his own limits were being reached or when he sensed his generosity was being exploited. His children initially reacted with frustration and a degree of bewilderment at his refusal to continue bending over backward for them as he always had. However, over time, a subtle yet profoundly significant shift occurred in their perception and behavior. They began to truly value his time and appreciate his efforts, realizing that his generosity was not an inexhaustible resource, but a precious gift, a demonstration of love, not a guaranteed right that could be demanded at will. If you find yourself feeling that your children are disrespecting your valuable time, your considerable effort, or your inherent kindness, it is time for a serious reassessment of your own giving patterns. Ask yourself honestly if you are consistently giving more than is healthy or sustainable for your own well-being, and carefully consider the impact that strategically withdrawing some of that abundance might have. When you demonstrate that your generosity is intrinsically linked to respectful interaction and acknowledgement, they will, over time, begin to treat it as such, recognizing its true value and the love from which it stems. One of the most potent and effective methods for rekindling and reinforcing your children's respect is to clearly and consistently showcase that your own happiness, your personal fulfillment, and your overall sense of purpose are not solely tethered to their existence or their engagement with your life. It is the deeply ingrained and natural inclination of parents to pour their entire lives, their energy, their focus, and their emotional reserves into their children, making them the absolute unquestioned center of their universe. However, as life naturally progresses and the children inevitably embark on their own independent paths, this all-consuming dynamic must evolve. If your primary identity and your fundamental sense of purpose have become entirely consumed and defined by your children, they may, consciously or unconsciously, begin to perceive you as someone with little else to occupy your time and attention, someone whose existence revolves solely around them. People, universally, tend to respect those who possess their own driving purpose, who are engaged in compelling interests, and who exude a deep, unshakable sense of personal fulfillment. If your children observe that you rely on them for entertainment, for validation, or even for the very meaning and purpose of your life, they can feel suffocated by the weight of this expectation. Or worse, they may view you as someone lacking a life of your own, someone who exists primarily to serve their needs. Consider the poignant example of Eleanor, a widow in her late 70s. Following the profound loss of her husband, she channeled all her remaining energy, her emotional reserves, and her available time into her children's lives, constantly checking in on them, offering unsolicited advice, and attempting to fill the void her husband had left with their attention and engagement. Tragically, this all-encompassing approach, rather than drawing them closer or fostering deeper connection, had the unintended consequence of pushing them away. Their visits became increasingly shorter, their calls less frequent, leaving Eleanor feeling more isolated and disconnected than ever before. Then she made a conscious, deliberate decision to forge a new path, to redefine her life beyond the confines of her children's immediate needs. She joined a local book club, embarking on intellectual adventures with like-minded individuals. She began to travel with her friends, experiencing new cultures and perspectives, and she became an active and engaged volunteer in her local community, finding purpose and connection in service. she consciously and purposefully removed her children from the absolute epicenter of her world, and as a result, a remarkable transformation began to unfold. Her children began to reach out more frequently, their curiosity piqued by her newfound pursuits and adventures, their admiration growing for her independence and self-reliance, and ultimately, their respect deepened for her renewed vitality and zest for life. If your children are exhibiting a discernible lack of respect, it is crucial to reflect on whether they perceive you as someone actively living a full, vibrant, and engaging life, or as someone passively awaiting their attention and approval. When you demonstrably prove that you are actively living, not merely existing, they will begin to perceive you in an entirely different, far more admirable, and profoundly respectful light. Ultimately, the quality of respect that you receive from your children is not a commodity that can be demanded, coerced, or even earned through mere persistence. It is an intangible yet powerful quality that is inspired, cultivated, and earned through the way you consistently conduct yourself, the clear and firm boundaries that you meticulously establish and uphold, and the undeniable richness of the life that you actively cultivate for yourself. If you find that your children have begun to treat you with less consideration, less thoughtfulness, or with outright disrespect, it is imperative to resist the overwhelming urge to expend your precious energy on anger or confrontation. Instead, pivot your strategy, embracing a more empowered and constructive approach. Stop chasing their approval, for the less you outwardly demonstrate that you need it, the more readily and genuinely they will be inclined to offer it. Lead by example, as your unwavering dignity and composed demeanor speak volumes that mere words often cannot convey. Withdraw your emotional dependence, because your evident self-sufficiency and inner resilience command a far greater respect for your presence and your opinions. Set firm, unambiguous boundaries for people, and especially those closest to us, will only treat you as well as you consistently permit them to. Cease giving without genuine appreciation, as generosity that is consistently taken for granted inevitably loses its inherent value and its power to connect. Most importantly, invest in building a life that extends meaningfully beyond the confines of your role as a parent, because people inherently respect those who possess their own unique purpose, their own authentic joy, and their own profound sense of personal fulfillment. By wholeheartedly embracing and consistently implementing these fundamental principles, a profound and transformative shift will inevitably occur. Your children will begin to perceive you not as someone passively waiting for their attention or their validation, but as an individual who commands respect simply by being authentically and unapologetically yourself. In time, that lost or diminished respect will not only return, but it will deepen, not because you demanded it, but because you have unequivocally and through your own exemplary actions earned it.